really don't like to acknowledge that on the left. And that's when Al Green got up there and started harassing Trump. This was debated, interestingly, the other day when Stephen A. Smith went on The View. And Joy Behar, she too pushed back. And even on this morning's The Daily, Maggie Haberman was pushing back on just how historic the victory. They really don't want to say historic. They don't want to say mandate. They don't want to say any of the things that Trump says. And they
supporter of Trump. I'm a supporter of truth and the facts. And here's the facts. The man won every swing state. He increased in terms of his voter turnout in his favor from the standpoint of blacks, Latinos, and young voters. He increased his numbers in that regard from 2020. 89% of the counties shifted to the right.
The morning on The View began like countless others, with the hosts sipping coffee, tossing quick lines, and recycling their polished talking points. The energy was calm, the smiles were practiced, and everything seemed perfectly scripted. But the moment Stephen A. Smith walked onto that stage, the entire atmosphere shattered in an instant. The panel wasn't ready for a guest who refused to sit quietly and nod along like a puppet. Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward, expecting a smooth, easy chat. But she was wrong. Stephen A. Smith didn't come to play nice. He came to unleash truths no one on that stage wanted to confront. "Look," he started, steady yet unyielding. "Democrats have a black man problem, and everybody knows it." His words cracked through the studio like thunder, freezing Whoopi mid-expression on live television. And he wasn't stopping. He spelled it out boldly. As a black man in America, Democrats had offered nothing real, absolutely nothing. The silence that followed was piercing. The hosts shifted awkwardly in their chairs, as if each of them realized he had just said what no one else had dared to admit before.
Comfortable all those women in the panel were by literally sitting next to a black man that's not just gonna nod on like a bobblehead and go along with all their Democrat talking points. So look, the Democrats have a black male problem, right? Everybody knows that. And Stephen A. Smith has been very savvy in kind of like coming from the sports commentator world. He's extremely successful, and then kind of putting himself into the space where I'm gonna say I am not for Trump, but I am going to sit here and I'm going to tell you the truth about everything that is going on right now. It's very savvy. Because, and this is where I'll throw the black card down on the table. If you are a black man, Democrats have absolutely nothing to offer.
Whoopi tried to jump in with a defense, but Stephen sliced right through the noise. "I'm not a supporter of Trump. I'm a supporter of truth," he declared with fire, and the audience exploded into applause. He pulled out the very numbers the media buried, revealing that Trump didn't just hold steady. He actually gained ground with black voters, Latino voters, and the younger generation. Then came the bombshell. Nearly 90% of counties had shifted to the right. The hosts scrambled, desperately trying to spin the win as smaller than it truly was. They tossed percentages, argued about mandates, and tried to downplay the shift, but Stephen stood firm, knocking each weak argument down like falling dominoes. "It is a mandate," he said with unwavering conviction, because this wasn't just about Trump. It was a rejection of the Democratic Party and their failure to deliver. The audience gasped, and Whoopi's smile faded instantly. He pressed further, reminding everyone that Biden had once called himself a transitional president, nothing more than a stopgap. But where was the transition? Nowhere. The midterms exposed cracks, but this landslide made the truth undeniable. Whoopi tried to challenge the historic angle, but Stephen didn't budge. He stood steady, almost unshakable, and repeated, "This wasn't luck, this was history, and denying it is the real issue." He ripped open the truth about how Democrats drifted from their roots, the working class, the people they once represented. Instead, he warned, they've chased applause on social media instead of delivering real change. The words stung sharply, and Whoopi looked visibly shaken, shifting nervously in her seat.
Thoughts on the election as it just went down?
I was surprised at how lopsided it was. I was not surprised by the outcome. I saw the outcome coming from a mile away. You have to take into account, listen, we respect our president, Joe Biden, but here's the reality. He got into office. He promised to be a transitional president, to be a stopgap to pave the way for somebody else to come on board. Into the midterms, it was supposed to be a red wave. It did not happen.
Trump's only been in office for 6 weeks. Seems like 6 years, doesn't it? And he's been going around with his cronies touting his so-called landslide and blowout win. But he won the popular vote by 1.5%, one of the smallest ever, and he won the general election by less than 50%. So what kind of mandate is this really?
Well, it is a mandate, and I'm going to explain why.
She had lost control of the conversation, and the audience could feel it. Stephen A. Smith flipped the entire show upside down, and then came the moment that left jaws on the floor. He locked eyes with Whoopi and declared, "If you are a black man, Democrats have absolutely nothing to offer you." The air seemed to vanish from the studio, leaving everyone frozen in silence. This wasn't just a headline-grabbing phrase, it was a brutal reality check. He spoke about black households led by strong women, about Latino men choosing Trump out of pure economic survival, about voters choosing not identity, but livelihood. Each statement landed like a direct hit, leaving no room for excuses. One host tried to steer the talk toward Trump's ties to sports, hoping to soften the blow, but Stephen spun it right back with razor-sharp clarity. He reminded them he had been present in those spaces, visible in those communities, long before politics entered the picture. And people had noticed. The audience clapped in agreement, louder this time. Then he went further, declaring Trump's victory wasn't just about him. It was a direct indictment of the Democratic Party. Even after impeachments, even after felony convictions, people still voted for him. That, he said, wasn't blind loyalty. It was outright rejection of the alternative. Whoopi tried again to change the subject, but Stephen wasn't letting her escape. People are tired of speeches, tired of promises, tired of being ignored, he said firmly. And in that moment, he sounded more like the voice of the people than anyone else sitting at that table. By the time he wrapped up, the tension was unbearable. Whoopi sat there, silenced by a truth she couldn't brush off with her trademark comebacks. Stephen leaned back calmly, unshaken, as the gasps from the audience echoed across the room.
Press things later on. That's always been his MO, and that's what we've seen.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to what you said about black men being very comfortable with matriarchy, and I agree with that because, you know, black households are often led by a grandmother, black grandmother or black mother. However, 55% of Latino men voted for Trump. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think that economically, they were looking at things. First of all, you've got, in this country, you've got Cubans, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Guatemalans, Venezuelans, Colombians, et cetera, et cetera. And if you talk to the Hispanic community, depending on who you're talking to, they think differently. The Cubans think differently than the Dominicans. The Dominicans think different than Colombians. To some,
Whoopi tried to regain her footing, but it was already too late. The crowd wasn't watching her anymore. Their eyes were locked on Stephen A. Smith. He reminded everyone that Trump didn't scrape by. He surged with voters the Democrats assumed belonged to them. That's not chance. That's deliberate, he declared, and the audience nodded fiercely in agreement. The hosts tried again, clinging to the argument that Trump only won the popular vote by a slim edge. But Stephen shut it down with precision. It's not just about percentages, it's about momentum, he fired back, and the panel fell silent. Whoopi scrambled for control, but Stephen cut straight through her every attempt. This isn't about Trump's personality, it's about survival, he shouted with power, and the audience roared in response. Whoopi sat stunned, clutching her notes with shaky hands as the weight of his words sank in. Stephen pressed harder, explaining that ordinary people, especially black and Latino voters, weren't swayed by slogans or speeches, but by jobs, paychecks, and safety. They're voting for their lives, not for hashtags, he thundered, and the studio erupted with cheers that shook the walls. The co-hosts froze, their talking points collapsing live on air as Stephen ripped through the narrative with ease. Then he turned the spotlight to the Democrats' biggest weakness, the economy. He pointed out that black men, Latino men, and working-class Americans weren't seeing the results they had been promised. They don't see it because it doesn't exist, he declared with fire, and the truth landed like a thunderbolt. One co-host tried nervously to steer the topic toward Latino voters, but Stephen was ready. Cubans think differently than Mexicans. Dominicans think differently than Colombians. They are not a monolith, And pretending they are is insulting, he shot back, and the panel sat in stunned silence, out of answers and out of time.
Said you were, way back in 2016, before Trump ran for president, you were friendly with him because he's really into sports. And you said that the fact that he's a sports guy, which I didn't realize because I don't think of sports when I look at him, but I'm not even being snarky. I just don't think of a sports
What
guy.
about riding around a golf court? Doesn't that count?
Right. But you, on the other hand, I get, you said that being a sports guy helped him.
Well,
what did you mean by that?
Because what happened is that a lot of African Americans, Latinos, and others, we associated ourselves with him because he would host fights at Trump casinos. He would show up at basketball games.
The audience gasped as Stephen revealed a truth most politicians refuse to admit. Democrats treat minority groups as one giant block instead of listening to their real needs. The silence from the panel spoke volumes. Whoopi leaned in, desperate to seize back control of the discussion, but Stephen held his ground with unshakable force. He laid it out bluntly. This isn't about personalities. It's about policies, results, and who actually delivers them. His words echoed like thunder, and then came the line that shook the entire room. Minority voters didn't betray Democrats. They just stopped letting the media speak for them. The audience exploded in applause, so loud it drowned out Whoopi's attempts to respond. The cameras zoomed in on her face, and for the first time in years, she looked shaken on her own set. The confidence she usually carried so effortlessly was gone, replaced with visible frustration. Stephen leaned forward, laser-focused, refusing to let go of the moment. People are tired of being told what to think. They want action, not theater, he declared. And it wasn't commentary anymore. It was a direct challenge to the entire political system. Another host nervously tried to shift the fire back onto Trump, whispering about his flaws, but Stephen swatted it away with ease. Nobody's saying he's perfect. They're saying he was the only one willing to fight for them, he blasted, and the crowd clapped even louder, their cheers rattling the stage. Whoopi attempted to break the tension with a joke, but it fell flat. Nothing could stop Stephen's momentum, and the audience hung on to every word he spoke. Then he dropped a bombshell no one saw coming. He stared straight at Whoopi and declared, "The Democratic Party used to be the party of the working class, but not anymore."
What does that say about the Republican Party?
It's not about what it says about the Republican Party. It's about what it says about the Democratic Party.
Why?
Because in the end, if you think about him being impeached twice, 34 felony counts or 34 felony convictions, and they still elected him president, it's not about him winning. It was an indictment against the Democratic Party and what the Democratic Party was offering to American citizens. We might sit up there and talk about, hey, you should be a party for the working class, which the Democratic Party was once known for. They're not known for that right now. Why? Because their message was catering towards others and towards other issues, and they forgot about the people that brought them there, that elevated the Democratic Party to what it was over these last few.
The statement hit like dynamite, shaking the entire studio to its core. Stephen laid out how Democrats had abandoned the very people who once built their party, choosing to chase the approval of elites instead of standing with ordinary Americans. The audience roared in agreement while Whoopi scrambled for a response, but Stephen gave her no opening. He pressed harder, his voice steady but fierce. That's why voters flipped. They're not worried about labels, they're worried about survival. The cheers grew louder, and the panel sat frozen, their faces tight with shock, as if lightning had struck right in front of them. Every word Stephen spoke was a hammer driving the truth deeper. A truth the mainstream media tried desperately to deny. And every time Whoopi attempted to interrupt, he shut her down without even raising his voice. The cameras captured the rare sight. Whoopi Goldberg completely stopped in her tracks, powerless to steer the show back under her control. But Stephen wasn't finished. He was only building momentum. He turned directly to the panel and announced, this wasn't just a Republican win, it was a national wake-up call. The studio shook with applause, and the hosts sat paralyzed, unable to muster a single counterpoint. Then came another bombshell. Nearly 90% of counties in America turned red. That's not coincidence, that's a landslide. Gasps filled the air as the panel looked like they'd just taken a knockout punch. Whoopi tried one last desperate push, arguing the popular vote margin was too slim to call it decisive. But Stephen didn't blink. A slim margin in the popular vote doesn't erase the fact that entire regions flipped. That's the definition of a mandate. His words sliced clean through the panel's narrative like a razor. The tension became unbearable. Whoopi's face hardened, her eyes narrowed, but Stephen stood unshaken. He wasn't just debating, he was dismantling years of spin live, right in front of a stunned national audience.
Stern says that he wasn't confident that the country was ready to elect the first female president because he knows, quote, how men talk behind closed doors about us. So we're very privileged to have a great guy here today.
Yeah.
Tell her, what do men say about us behind closed doors?
Well, first of all,
Say it to our faces.
Yeah, do tell.
I don't hide, so no worries there. Here's the deal. I respectfully disagree with Howard Stern, only from the standpoint that I wish he had been more specific. Why don't you say white men? Because let me tell you something about black men. I must confess, I wish I could debate some of these guys. I'd love to be on a debate stage going up against these guys with the presidency on the line.
We will arrange that.
I'm half joking, but I kind of mean it. I mean, I have no desire to be a congressional figure or a senator. But if you came to me and you told me I had a legitimate shot to win the presidency of the United States of America, I would definitely consider it. But here's the problem.
So you want to break through the line?
Yeah, that's right.
Stephen then shifted to culture, blasting Howard Stern's claim that America wasn't ready for a female president. Why don't you say white men? He shot back boldly. Because black men don't talk like that about women. The room went dead silent as Whoopi's eyes widened in shock. The audience gasped in disbelief. This wasn't how the view was supposed to go. Stephen had just dropped a cultural grenade right on the table, and no one was prepared for it. Then he raised the stakes even higher. If you're a black man in America right now, you know Democrats don't speak for you. They expect you to fall in line. The words slammed into the panel like a hammer, and none of them could answer. Whoopi tried frantically to change the subject, but Stephen locked eyes with her, refusing to let her slip away. People are walking away because they're tired of being ignored, he declared, and the audience erupted in the loudest cheers yet. Then came the moment that stunned the entire studio. Even with impeachment, even with convictions, people still voted for Trump. That wasn't about him. It was about rejecting the Democrats. The shock was written all over the hosts' faces, while the crowd clapped, cheered, and some even jumped to their feet. Stephen A. Smith wasn't just making points, he was seizing the stage completely. He leaned forward, sharp and controlled. The truth is simple. Americans don't want excuses anymore, they want results. The audience thundered in approval as Whoopi looked down at her notes, silenced and defeated. The panel made one last weak attempt to claw back the conversation, but Stephen wouldn't give an inch. He commanded the stage with total dominance, and everyone watching knew it.
The virtue of Stephen A. Okay, and I don't mean to canonize this guy. And I'm afraid because I know what happens when somebody's getting elevated. There's now a price on you to bring you down, and I don't want to see that for him. So that's why I'm shy on this. But he is also a reminder that reasonable should be a commodity. It should be a commodity. The fact that you got to be full-on MAGA or you got to want to kill Trump.
Yeah, about politics. And you said that you were not shocked that Trump won, but you were stunned that it was a landslide. Why do you think most people didn't see it coming?
Because the pollsters told us, and we believed them, that it was going to be a tight race. They were in panic mode. And the reason why so many people were in panic mode was because the tighter the race, the more chaos presumably would ensue, because he would automatically say it was rigged. He would challenge the outcome of the election. We all knew this. And as a result, folks were fearful that it was going to be a replica of 2020.
You can spin the headlines, you can shape the narratives, but the people have already spoken. Stephen declared with force, his hand raised slightly as the studio fell into silence. This isn't about being pro-Trump, it's about being pro-truth, he said firmly, and the crowd leaned in, hanging on every word. He pressed further, exposing how the media survives by dividing people into extremes. But it's the reasonable voices that terrify them most, because reason cuts through the lies. The audience erupted in wild cheers, while Whoopi shook her head, unable to muster a reply. One by one, the co-hosts lowered their gaze, realizing this wasn't just another guest appearance, it was a complete takeover of the show. Stephen then turned straight to the camera, speaking directly to the millions watching at home. "Stop letting people tell you what to think. Start looking at the truth for yourself," he demanded, and the audience leapt to their feet in thunderous applause. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, drained and defeated. She hadn't landed a single punch. For the first time, she wasn't the commanding voice of the room. Stephen A. Smith was. The segment didn't end with laughter, banter, or scripted charm. It ended in stunned silence, shattered only by the roar of the audience. Stephen A. Smith had done the impossible. He stopped Whoopi Goldberg cold on live television, leaving the entire panel stunned and speechless. What began as a normal morning broadcast ended as one of the most unforgettable moments in the history of The View.